I never thought $11.40 for a stranger's heart medicine would be the thing that kept me breathing. But when that old man caught my sleeve at the pharmacy counter and leaned in close, his voice dropping to almost nothing. "After your son-in-law clears out, don't plow your driveway. Whatever you do, leave the snow be." There was something in his eyes that made the back of my neck go cold. The next morning I stood at my kitchen window with my coffee going cold in my hand, and what I saw out there in the fresh white kept me alive. I didn't understand it yet, but I would. Before I get into it, I'd like to know where you're listening from tonight. Drop your town, your state, your country down in the comments. It does an old man good to know somebody's out there. And I'll say up front, the way I always do, that I've changed some names and shaped some details for the telling. But the heart of this, the part about trusting the wrong people and the cost of pride, that part is as true as anything I know. It was the third week of November, up here in the northern part of Michigan, the year I turned 71. We'd had an early freeze and then a heavy snow the night before, the wet kind that bows the pines and makes the whole world go quiet. I'd lived on that lake my entire married life, Crow Lake, a long skinny finger of cold water with my place sitting on 4 acres at the dead end of a county road, the last house before the woods take over. My wife and I bought it back when lakefront up here was something a school teacher and a millwright could still afford. We raised our daughter in that house. We grew old in it together until she wasn't there to grow old with anymore. She passed 4 winters back. Cancer, the slow and cruel kind. I still set the coffee maker for 2 out of habit and pour the second cup down the drain. The house holds the shape of her. Her reading glasses are still on the windowsill. I keep meaning to move them, and I never do. I'd been up since before 5 that morning, the way I always am. Old bodies don't sleep. They just rest in shifts. I'd shoveled a path to the woodshed and split a few rounds of maple and stood out there a minute watching my breath hang in the air. The lake was starting to skim over at the edges, that black glass with a film of gray. It was a good morning. I remember thinking that. A good morning. The kind that makes you grateful your knees still carry you down the porch steps. That was the morning my son-in-law showed up unannounced, which should have told me something right there. He pulled in around 9 in that big leased pickup he could never afford, the one he was always behind on. He'd married my daughter 11 years ago. I never warmed to him the way a father hopes to warm to the man his girl chooses, but I'd worked at it. I told myself a man can grow into things. He had a salesman's handshake and a salesman's way of looking right past you while he talked. And over the years I'd learned to let it slide for her sake and for my granddaughter, who was 9 then, and the brightest thing in my life. He came up the steps stamping snow off his boots and grinning. Said he was in the area, which was a lie because nobody is ever in the area at the end of my road. He sat at my kitchen table and drank my coffee and got around to it slow, the way they do. There was an opportunity, a franchise thing, a fitness studio downstate, ground floor, can't miss. He needed to move fast, and the bank was being the bank. He needed $12,000 to lock his spot before the window closed. I'm not a rich man, but I'd put a little away over 50 years of work, and there was Ruth's life insurance I'd hardly touched because touching it felt like spending her. $12,000 was real money to me, but he was family. He was my daughter's husband, my granddaughter's father, and when you've buried your wife and you live at the end of a dead road, the people you've got left look an awful lot like the only people you've got. I told him I'd think on it. He said the window closed Monday. He squeezed my shoulder on the way out and said he and my daughter were grateful, that they didn't know what they'd do without me. Then he said the strangest thing. He said he was driving down to handle some business and would be gone a few days, and that I shouldn't worry about the place. He'd had a buddy come by to check the propane line while he was here. I hadn't seen anybody. I figured I'd misheard. He left around 11. I watched the pickup disappear down the county road, snow kicking up behind it, and I had no idea I was watching a man drive off to set the last piece of a trap. That afternoon I drove into town for my blood pressure medication. I've been on the same 2 pills for a dozen years, a heart that skips now and then. Nothing a careful man can't live with. The pharmacy is in the back of the grocery, and there was a line, the way there always is the day before a storm warning. The old man was ahead of me, stooped, in a canvas coat too thin for the weather, counting out bills with shaking hands while the pharmacist told him gently that his copay had gone up, that it was $40 now, not 11, some change in his plan. He didn't have it. You could see it cost him something terrible to stand there and not have it. He started to say he'd come back next week, and I knew what that meant. Next week he'd go without. I've been the man who couldn't quite make the number work, so I stepped up and told the pharmacist to put it on mine. The old man turned and looked at me, and I'll never forget his face. Not grateful, exactly. Stunned. Like a man who'd stopped believing the world did things like that. He waited for me by the doors while I paid for my own. He asked my name, and I told him. Earl Whitfield. And when I said Whitfield, something moved across his face like a cloud crossing a field. He asked where I lived, just making talk, and I said out at the end of the county road on Crow Lake, the old place past the boat launch. That's when his hand shot out and gripped my forearm. Hard, harder than a man that age should be able to grip. He pulled me close, and his voice dropped, and he said it. After your son-in-law clears out, don't plow your driveway. Leave the snow be. Then he let go and went out into the cold, got into a rusted-out sedan and drove off. And I stood there in the warm grocery air with my heart doing that skip it does, thinking I'd just met a man who'd lost his mind. I almost forgot about it by supper time. Almost. I didn't plow that night. Partly because the old man's words sat in me like a stone, and partly because I was tired and the storm had passed and there was no place I needed to be. I went to bed early. I slept in shifts the way I do. The next morning I came down before light and made my coffee and stood at the window over the sink, and that's when I saw it. Tire tracks. Cutting up my driveway from the road, swinging wide around the back of the house toward the woodshed in the propane tank, then back out. Deep, fresh, pressed into snow that had stopped falling hours before I went to bed. And alongside them, boot prints. Big ones. More than one set, leading off the drive and into the yard near the shed, where the snow was churned up and dark, like somebody had knelt down and dug. I stood there a long time. My coffee went cold. Because here's the thing about fresh snow, and here's the thing I understood standing at that window with my heart skipping. If I'd plowed the night before, the way I always do, the way any sensible man up here does, those tracks would be gone, scraped clean. The whole yard a blank sheet. Somebody could have driven onto my property in the dark and done whatever they came to do, and I'd have erased every trace of it myself before sunup, thinking I was just keeping my drive clear. The old man had known. He'd known somebody was coming. He'd known they'd drive in around the back. And he'd known the only thing that would ever prove it was the snow I was about to scrape away. I want you to sit with that the way I had to. A stranger I'd met for 90 seconds at a pharmacy counter, a man I'd never laid eyes on before in my life, had known that someone was going to creep onto my land in the middle of the night, the very night my son-in-law made sure to tell me he'd be gone. How does a man know a thing like that? I put my boots on and went out. I didn't touch anything. I'd watched enough television to know that much. I followed the boot prints to the churned-up spot by the woodshed, and I crouched down, my old knees screaming, and I looked. The snow there had been dug into and packed back over, clumsy in a hurry. I didn't dig. Every part of me wanted to, but something told me that whatever was buried there wasn't put there for my benefit, and that the worst thing I could do was pull it up with my own bare hands and my own fingerprints all over it. I took out my phone. I'm no good with the thing. My wife always handled the pictures, but I know how to make it click. I photographed the tracks, the prints, the dug-up patch, the propane line where it looked like somebody had been messing near the regulator. Every photo felt like I was building a case against something I couldn't even name yet. I went back inside and I sat at the kitchen table where my son-in-law had sat the day before, and I made myself think it through cold. He'd come unannounced. He'd told me he'd be gone for days. He'd mentioned a buddy coming to check the propane, a buddy I never saw. He'd asked me for $12,000 on a Friday with the window closing Monday, and the night he made sure I knew he'd be far away, somebody drove onto my land and buried something by my woodshed and tried to cover it. I didn't want it to mean what it was starting to mean. You don't. He was my daughter's husband. To believe it, I'd have to believe my own family had a hand in it, and a man will twist himself into knots to keep from believing that. So I started checking. I got out my old laptop, but one my wife made me learn to use, and I went looking. There was no fitness franchise. There was no studio downstate, no franchise group by the name he'd given me, no business filing with the state under his name, nothing. The phone number he'd written on a slip of paper for the corporate office. I dialed it, and it rang through to a nail salon in Saginaw. Every word of it was air. I pulled my bank records. The $12,000 he wanted wasn't the first. There were 3 smaller transfers over the past year I'd made and half forgotten. 1,000 here, 1,500 there, always for some emergency, always paid back next month and never paid back at all. I'd been bleeding slow and calling it generosity. Then I made myself look closer at something I'd been ignoring, my own self. Because for the past few weeks I hadn't felt right. I'd chalked it up to age, the way men up here do, but the dizziness when I stood too fast, the way my heart had been racing and stumbling worse than it ever had, the fog that came over me some afternoons where I'd lose the thread of the simple thought, the morning I dropped a full mug on the kitchen floor because my hand just wouldn't hold it. Getting old, I'd told myself. 71, it catches up. But the dizziness had started right around the time my daughter began coming by more. She'd visit on a Sunday with a casserole and a worried look, and she'd fuss over my pills, line them up, fill my weekly organizer for me so I wouldn't forget. I'd thought it was love. I'd been grateful for it. A man living alone at the end of a road gets grateful for whoever fills his pill box. I drove to the pharmacy that same afternoon, the snow squeaking under my tires, and I asked the pharmacist a question. I asked her to tell me exactly what my 2 prescriptions were supposed to look like, the size, the color, the little stamp on each pill. Then I went home and opened my organizer and laid them out on the table under the lamp. The blood pressure ones were right. The heart pill was not. It was close. Close enough to fool an old man who didn't look twice. But it was a hair bigger, the color just slightly off. And there was a second little pill mixed in with them that I didn't recognize at all. I sat there for a long time. The lake was going dark outside, and I understood that somebody had been adding something to what I swallowed every morning. Somebody who filled my pill box. Somebody who came by on Sundays with a casserole and a worried look and watched me take them. I'm not too proud to tell you I cried at that table. Not for myself. For the little girl I'd taught to fish off that dock, the one who'd grown into the woman who was poisoning her own father a pill at a time. I didn't sleep that night either. By morning, I'd made up my mind, and I drove the photos and the pill organizer into the county sheriff's office, and I asked to speak to a detective. Her name was Detective Pruitt, a no-nonsense woman about my daughter's age with reading glasses plished up in her hair. She listened. She looked at my photographs a long time, and when I laid out the pill organizer and told her what I'd found, she stopped being polite and started being careful, which is a different thing. She bagged the pills. She told me not to take a single one until they'd been tested. She asked me, gentle but direct, who had access to fill that box. I told her it was the hardest sentence I've ever said out loud. My daughter. They sent a deputy out to my place that afternoon, and the man dug up what was buried by my woodshed. I stood on the porch in the cold and watched. It was a brick of something wrapped in plastic, and from the way the deputy's whole posture changed when he uncovered it, I knew before they told me, fentanyl. A quantity the detective said later that didn't mean possession. It meant trafficking. It meant a man going away for a long, long time. And it had been buried on my land, my woodshed, my 4 acres. If somebody had called in an anonymous tip, the way I'd later learned somebody almost did, the sheriff would have found a 71-year-old man living alone with a trafficking weight of fentanyl buried 20 feet from his back door. They'd have taken me away in handcuffs, and a man arrested, a man maybe declared unfit, a man fading from some mystery illness nobody could explain. That's a man whose lakefront property could be sold right out from under him by whoever holds his power of attorney. That's when the detective told me about the document. In the course of looking into my son-in-law, they'd already pulled a filing, a durable power of attorney dated 6 weeks back, naming him to act on my behalf in all financial and medical matters, with my signature on it. I'd never signed any such thing. I'd never heard of it. But there was my name, in a hand close enough to mine to pass, notarized by some outfit, 2 counties over, that the detective said would stamp anything for the right price. He practiced my signature. My own son-in-law had sat somewhere with my name on a piece of scrap paper and practiced it until he could fake it well enough to take my life apart while I was still living it. The pills came back 2 weeks later. Digoxin, they said, on top of my real heart medication. A drug that in the wrong dose does exactly what they wanted it to do. Makes an old heart stutter and slow. Makes a man dizzy and confused and weak. Makes him look, to a doctor and a judge, like a man whose mind and body are giving out. Like a man who needs a guardian. Like a man who, if his heart just happened to stop one quiet morning out at the end of a county road, well, he was 71 and not, well, was he? No one would have looked twice. I won't walk you through every day of what came after, because some of it I'd rather not live again. The arrests. My daughter in the back of a county car, not meeting my eyes. My granddaughter, 9 years old, sent to stay with her other grandmother 3 hours away, and the phone call where she asked me why Mommy and Daddy were gone and I had no answer, a child could hold. But I'll tell you about the trial, because the trial is where I learned the rest of it. The part that broke me open and put me back together different. My son-in-law, it came out, owed money, not franchise money, gambling money. He'd gotten into the sports betting, the kind you do on your phone at 2 in the morning, the kind that takes your house $100 at a time until one day you owe more than you'll ever make. He was into a man for $190,000, a man connected to people who move product through small towns where nobody's watching, and those people had offered him a way out, hide their weight somewhere safe, somewhere a cop would never think to look, an old veteran's quiet lake place at the end of a dead road. But that wasn't enough to clear what he owed, so the plan grew teeth. Tip the law to the drugs. Get the old man arrested, or, better, get him declared incompetent first. The illness already doing its work, the forged power of attorney already in place. Sell the lakefront, pay the debt. And my daughter, God help me, my daughter had gone along. The prosecutor read her text messages out loud in that courtroom. She'd been the one to suggest the digoxin. She'd looked it up. He's strong as an ox, she'd written. We need to soften him first. They'll think it's his heart. My own girl, the one I taught to ride a bike in the church parking lot. Soften him first. The man my son-in-law owed sat in that courtroom too, in custody, a heavy, quiet man who never once looked nervous. And there was an old man in the gallery, every single day in a thin canvas coat. It took me until the second day to place him. It was him, The stranger from the pharmacy. He sat in the back and watched the heavy, quiet man with an expression I couldn't read, and when our eyes met across that room, he gave me the smallest nod, and I felt the floor tilt under me. After it was over, after the verdicts, he was waiting for me on the courthouse steps in the cold. He asked if I'd sit with him a while. I owed him my life, so I said I'd sit with him as long as he liked. He took me to a diner and bought my coffee with money I suspect he didn't have, returning the $11.40  100 times over. And he told me his name was Elias. The heavy, quiet man in custody. The one who'd loaned my son-in-law the money and supplied the weight buried by my woodshed. That was his grandson. He raised the boy after the boy's mother went bad and the father was never in the picture. He'd done his best and watched his best amount to nothing. Watched the boy grow into something he didn't recognize and couldn't reach. He'd known what the boy was. He'd heard him, weeks before, on the phone in Elias's own kitchen, working out the plan. He'd heard a name. Whitfield, the old man on Crow Lake. The mark. And that name had stopped Elias's heart in his chest. Because he'd carried the name Whitfield for 55 years. He pulled out a photograph, soft and creased from handling. Two young men in fatigues squinting into a hard sun, a helicopter behind them. He pointed to one. "That's my brother," he said, and then he told me a thing I had no way to be ready for. His brother and my brother had been in the same war. The same province. May of 1970, an ambush near a river whose name I won't try to pronounce, a squad cut off and pinned down. His brother had gone back into the fire to pull men out, one at a time, while the world came apart around him. He pulled out 4. Then he went back a 5th time for the last man, a 19-year-old kid from Michigan who'd taken a round through the leg and couldn't crawl. He got that kid onto his shoulder and carried him out, and on the way back across that open ground, he took the round that killed him. He died so that the last man would live. The last man was named Carl Whitfield, my brother, my big brother, who came home from that war with a limp and a quiet. He carried the rest of his short life, who told me once, just once, late and drunk and crying, that a man he never even got to thank had given him 40 more years. He had no right to. Carl died of a heart attack at 60. A good man. My mother's pride. And I never knew the name of the man who'd carried him out of that field. Carl never knew it either. The army doesn't always hand you the name of the man who died for you. Elias knew. Elias has spent 55 years knowing his brother died, saving a Michigan boy named Whitfield, and he'd made his peace with it being a name and nothing more, a debt the world had quietly absorbed, until his own grandson said that name out loud in his kitchen, attached to a plan to murder the boy's father for a piece of lakefront. So he had a choice to make. The only blood he had left in this world, the grandson he'd raised on one side, and on the other, the family his own brother had bled out in the mud to save. He chose us. He turned in his own grandson. He went to the pharmacy that day, not by accident, he told me. He'd driven out to that grocery because it was near my road, because he'd been trying to work up the nerve to warn me for days, and couldn't find a way to do it that wouldn't put his grandson away. When I paid for his medicine, when I said my name, he took it as the last sign he needed. He warned me with the only words he dared. Leave the snow be. And the next morning, after he was sure I'd seen what the snow would show me, he made an anonymous call to the sheriff himself and gave them enough to start watching, and signed his own grandson's fate. You sacrificed your own blood for me, I said, for a debt that wasn't even yours. He looked out the diner window a long while. It was my brother's debt, he said, and my brother's not here to pay it, so it fell to me. We sat there, 2 old men who'd both been saved by the same act of sacrifice, 55 years and a generation apart, and there wasn't much left to say. My son-in-law is in prison and will be for a long time. My daughter took a lesser deal for her testimony, but she'll serve real years, and when she comes out, she'll come out to a father who loves her and will never again trust her. And I don't know yet how a man holds those two things at once. I'm learning. My granddaughter lives with me now, out on the lake in the house where I taught her mother to fish. I drive her to school. I braid her hair badly. I'm 72 now and raising a child, and some mornings my heart skips, and I think of the digoxin, and I'm grateful, fiercely, painfully grateful for every ragged beat. Elias comes by on Sundays. We split wood we don't need, we don't talk much, we don't have to. If you stayed with me this long, let me leave you with what this cost me to learn. Don't let your pride build a wall between you and the people you love, the way I let it, the way my son-in-law let it. Owing a fortune and too proud to ask the man across his own kitchen table for help before desperation turned him into something monstrous. Talk to your family before the silence does the deciding for you. Forgiveness isn't forgetting, and it isn't pretending the wound never happened. It's setting down a weight that was only ever poisoning you to carry. And a man's legacy was never the land or the dollars in the account. It's the lives that touched yours, the strangers who carried your brother out of the fire, the old man who told you to leave the snowbee. If this story moved you, leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. And tell me one thing. What would you have done if you'd seen those tracks in the snow? Hit that like button and subscribe so I can keep telling these to whoever needs to hear them. And to every one of you out there at the end of your own quiet road, may God put an old man in a thin coat in your path on the day you need him most. He did for me. I leave the snow be now. I always will. I keep coming back to the $11.40. Such a small thing. A copay for a stranger in a thin coat, paid without thinking the way my mother taught me you help a man who's come up short. And that small thing is the only reason I'm alive to tell you any of this. Nothing in my life has ever made the math of cause and effect so plain. I gave a little, and a man I'd never met gave me back the rest of my years. That's not luck. That's what happens when you do the decent thing in a small moment and don't stop to ask what's in it for you. But I'd be lying if I let you think kindness alone saved me. Kindness opened the door. What kept me alive after that was paying attention. When I saw those tracks in the snow, something in me wanted to scrape it all clean and go back to my coffee and pretend my family loved me the way I needed them to. The harder thing, the thing that actually saved me, was looking straight at what I didn't want to see, counting the transfers I'd half forgotten, calling the number that rang through to a nail salon, laying my heart pills out under the lamp and admitting one of them was wrong. A man can be good his whole life and still be destroyed if he won't let himself see clearly. Goodness without clear eyes is just a soft target. I learned that at 71 with my own daughter's name in my mouth. And then there was the part nobody tells you about. After I knew, I still had to act. I had to drive those photos to the sheriff. I had to say out loud to Detective Pruitt that the person filling my pillbox was my own girl. I had to stand on my porch and watch a deputy dig poison out of my yard. There were a dozen mornings I wanted to lie down and let my stuttering heart finish what they'd started, because being right hurt worse than being fooled. But you put your boots on. You do the next hard thing, and then the one after that. That's the only way through a betrayal like this. Not strength like an ox, the way my son-in-law thought of me. The quieter kind. The kind that gets up at 5 and keeps going. Elias chose the family his brother bled for over his own blood, and that cost him everything but his self-respect. Carl came home from that war owing a debt he could never name, and I came out the far side of all this raising my granddaughter on the lake, braiding her hair badly, grateful for every ragged beat. If there's anything I'd hand to you across this table, it's this. Be the person who pays the $11. Then be honest enough to see what's really in front of you. Then be stubborn enough to do something about it. Decency opens the door. Clear eyes show you the room, and grit carries you across it. I lead the snow, be now. I always will.